Sofia Delgado stood on the balcony of her sleek, glass-paneled penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city sparkled below, its heartbeat a rhythmic pulse that mirrored her own relentless drive. At 42, she was the CEO of Arcadia Tech, a multi-million-dollar empire that had revolutionized renewable energy solutions. Her ascent to power was the stuff of legends, a self-made woman who had clawed her way up in an industry dominated by men. To the outside world, Sofia was invincible, a paragon of success, control, and brilliance. But tonight, a subtle unease gnawed at her, though she couldn't pinpoint why. The occasion was her 15th wedding anniversary. Her husband, Ethan, had orchestrated an intimate gathering of close friends and family in their spacious living room below. The elegant space was a perfect reflection of their life, pristine, expensive, and carefully curated. Yet as Sofia descended the spiral staircase, the laughter from the guests felt hollow, like an echo of something missing. "Darling, you look stunning!" Ethan greeted her with a wide smile. He was effortlessly charming, the kind of man who could light up a room with his charisma. His tailored suit hugged his frame perfectly, a symbol of the power couple they were perceived to be. "Thank you," Sofia replied, her voice steady though her eyes lingered on him for a moment too long. There had been something different about Ethan lately, a subtle shift in his demeanor, extra gym sessions, a new cologne, his phone always just out of reach. She'd dismissed these observations as paranoia, chalking it up to her relentless schedule and the pressures of running a corporation. Yet the gnawing doubt remained, like a splinter lodged in her mind. "Let's toast," Ethan announced, drawing her back into the moment. He held up a crystal glass filled with champagne, his other arm slipping possessively around her waist. Their guests, friends, colleagues, and a few family members raised their glasses in unison, their faces beaming. Sofia's best friend and CFO, Lila Morgan, stood nearest, her auburn hair catching the light as she whispered something to Ethan, eliciting a quiet laugh. Sofia's smile faltered, but recovered instantly. She had mastered the art of hiding discomfort behind a polished exterior. Her analytical mind cataloged every interaction, every stray glance. Lila's proximity to Ethan was nothing new. They had always been close, but tonight it grated on her nerves. After the toast, Sofia excused herself under the pretense of checking on the caterers. She retreated to the kitchen, her sanctuary from the prying eyes of the party. The air felt heavier here, the hum of the refrigerator a low, soothing sound that contrasted with the laughter outside. She leaned against the marble countertop, her mind racing. She pulled out her phone and opened Ethan's shared calendar, a habit she'd developed more out of efficiency than distrust. Scanning through his recent entries, she noticed a recurring meeting every Thursday at noon, a time he was supposedly at the gym. The location was vague, marked only as lunch meeting. Sofia's instincts tingled. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Daniel Harper, her younger brother, who worked as Arcadia's head of operations. Daniel entered the kitchen with an easy grin, a glass of bourbon in hand. "Big sister, hiding out already?" he teased, leaning casually against the counter. "Just taking a moment," Sofia replied, forcing a smile. "How's the bourbon?" "Smooth as silk." "Almost as smooth as Ethan's little speech back there," Daniel said with a wink. "You've got yourself a real charmer." Sofia rolled her eyes but didn't respond. Daniel's teasing often carried a hint of something deeper, an insight he wasn't ready to share. Tonight, his words lingered in her mind. As the evening wore on, Sofia felt increasingly disconnected from the event. Conversations swirled around her, but she remained on the periphery, observing rather than participating. Ethan and Lila were inseparable, their whispered exchanges and shared smiles becoming impossible to ignore. When Lila slipped away to take a phone call, Sofia followed, her curiosity outweighing her decorum. She found Lila in the study, pacing as she spoke in hushed tones. "I know, but she doesn't suspect anything," Lila said, her voice low but laced with urgency. "We just need a little more time." Sofia's stomach twisted. She stepped back silently, retreating before Lila could notice her presence. The party continued as if nothing had happened, but for Sofia, The first crack in her perfect life had splintered into a fault line. As the guests filtered out later that night, Sophia stood in the doorway, her hand resting on Ethan's arm as they bid everyone goodbye. Lila's gaze lingered on Ethan a moment too long as she said goodnight. Daniel gave Sophia a knowing look as he exited, his cryptic parting words echoing in her mind. "Careful, sis. Even the strongest walls can have hidden leaks." Sophia smiled outwardly, but inside she felt her carefully constructed world begin to shift. She resolved to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The following morning, Sophia sat in her office, high above the bustling streets of Manhattan. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating her meticulously arranged desk. Yet, her mind was anything but orderly. The subtle but unmistakable clues from the previous night swirled in her head like a storm. Ethan's lingering smiles with Leela, Daniel's urgent, secretive phone call. Sophia prided herself on being a master of logic and deduction, traits that had propelled her to the top of her industry. But now, her personal life had turned into a puzzle she couldn't ignore. She took a sip of her black coffee, savoring the bitterness as it grounded her in the moment. She pulled out a notepad and began jotting down her thoughts. She paused, tapping the pen against the page. Her instincts told her that this was more than a petty dalliance or workplace gossip. Something larger was at play, and it had both personal and professional implications. Just then, her assistant, Jenna, poked her head through the door. "Lila's here for your 10 o'clock meeting." Sophia nodded, slipping the notepad into her desk drawer. "Send her in." Lila entered the office with her usual confidence, her tailored pantsuit immaculate, her auburn hair swept into a sleek ponytail. She smiled warmly at Sophia, but something about the gesture felt forced. "I thought we could review the projections for the West Coast expansion," Lila said, setting a folder on the desk. Sophia nodded, keeping her expression neutral. As Lila went through the numbers, Sophia studied her closely. Her CFO was sharp, polished, and unshakable, or so it seemed. But today, Sophia noticed a faint tension in her posture, a slight hesitation in her usually fluid speech. "Everything looks solid," Sophia said after a moment, flipping through the documents. "But I'd like you to explain the sudden increase in operational costs for the San Francisco office. It wasn't in last quarter's projections." Leela's eyes flickered, just for an instant. "That's due to some unanticipated vendor issues. I'll have a detailed breakdown sent to you by the end of the day." Sophia nodded again, though her mind raced. She recognized the tactic. Stalling. Lila needed time to come up with an explanation, and that only deepened Sophia's suspicion. Once Lila left, Sophia leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the Manhattan skyline. She picked up her phone and dialed Daniel. "Morning, sis," Daniel answered, his tone light but curious. "What's up?" "I need to ask you something," Sophia said, her voice firm. "What did you mean last night? About the strongest walls having hidden leaks?" There was a pause on the other end. "You're sharper than I give you credit for," Daniel said finally. "Look, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but let's just say you should pay closer attention to the people you trust the most." "Daniel," Sophia pressed, her patience thinning, "if you know something, you need to tell me." "I don't have concrete proof," he admitted, "but I've noticed some unusual activity, financial discrepancies that don't add up, private meetings between Lila and Ethan that don't seem work. I thought you might already know." Sophia's stomach dropped, but she maintained her composure. "Thanks, Daniel," she said, her voice cool. "I'll handle it." After hanging up, Sophia immediately accessed Arcadia Tech's internal financial system. She was no stranger to scrutinizing numbers, and if there were anomalies, she would find them. Hours passed as she combed through expense reports, vendor contracts, and meeting schedules. Slowly but surely, a pattern emerged. Her chest tightened as the pieces fell into place. Lila and Ethan were not only betraying her personally, but also embezzling from her company. The dual nature of their deceit cut deeper than she could have imagined. Sophia leaned back, closing her eyes. She felt a rush of emotions, anger, heartbreak, humiliation. But she quickly steeled herself. She hadn't built her empire by being weak. If they thought they could outsmart her, they had underestimated her. Sophia decided to act swiftly but strategically. Confrontation without evidence or a plan would only tip her hand. She needed leverage. She began by hiring a private investigator, someone discreet and highly recommended. Within days, she had photographic evidence of Ethan meeting Lila at a secluded restaurant, their body language unmistakably intimate. There were also records of their secretive financial dealings, including offshore accounts they had established together. Armed with proof, Sophia set her plan into motion. The following week, she invited Ethan to lunch at their favorite bistro. Over a bottle of wine, she played the role of the devoted wife, feigning ignorance of his betrayal. "How's work been?" she asked casually, twirling her fork in her pasta. "Busy, as always," Ethan replied, his smile easy. "But things are going well. You know how it is. Same old grind." Sophia tilted her head, studying him. "And Lila? She seems close to you lately. I hope everything's professional." Ethan froze for a split second before laughing it off. "Of course, she's a great CFO. You're lucky to have her on your team." The lie was so smooth, so effortless, that it sent a chill down Sophia's spine. Later that evening, she attended a board meeting where Lila presented the quarterly financials. Sophia let her speak uninterrupted, nodding along as if impressed. But as the meeting concluded, Sophia made her move. "Lila, stay behind for a moment," she said, her tone casual but firm. Lila hesitated, then nodded. Once the room was empty, Sophia closed the door and turned to face her. "I've noticed some irregularities in our financial reports," Sophia began, her voice calm but icy. "Care to explain?" Lila's face paled. "I'm not sure what you mean." Sophia slid a folder across the table. Inside were the incriminating documents, the authorized payments, the offshore accounts, the consulting firm registered under Ethan's alias. Lila's composure crumbled. "Sophia, Save it," Sophia cut her off. "I trusted you, Lila, not just as a colleague but as a friend. And this is how you repay me?" Tears welled in Lila's eyes, but Sophia felt no sympathy. "I'll give you one chance to come clean," she said. "Tell me everything, or I'll make sure you and Ethan both pay for this. But hang on, I have a better idea, my boy." Lila broke down, spilling the details of their scheme. She and Ethan had been involved for nearly a year, their affair evolving into a plan to siphon money from Arcadia and escape to Europe. Sophia listened in silence, her face a mask of control, but inside she was seething. Ethan and Lila had not only betrayed her, but had underestimated her intelligence. They thought they could steal from her and walk away unscathed. As Lila finished her confession, Sophia stood and straightened her blazer. "You'll tender your resignation immediately," she said. "If you refuse, I'll ensure you face criminal charges. Either way, your career in this industry is over." Lila nodded, defeated. Sophia left the office and headed home, her mind racing with the next steps. Ethan would be more difficult to confront, but she was ready. She wasn't just going to expose him, she was going to destroy him. As she stood in her penthouse that night, staring out at the city lights, Sophia felt a grim determination settle over her. The life she had built was far from perfect, but it was hers, and no one would take it away from her without a fight. Sophia awoke the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. Her emotions, anger, betrayal, and heartbreak had coalesced into a single driving force: vengeance. She wouldn't just salvage her life and career, she would dismantle Ethan's and Lila's carefully constructed web of deceit, piece by piece. The first step was Ethan. Confronting him required precision, timing, and a controlled narrative. Sophia had spent years mastering the art of negotiation, learning that power wasn't in loud declarations, but in silence, in the gaps where others underestimated her. She would let him believe he still had the upper hand, until it was too late. Sophia prepared breakfast for Ethan as though everything were normal: pancakes, freshly squeezed orange juice, and his favorite espresso, a ritual she hadn't indulged in for months due to her grueling schedule. When Ethan came into the kitchen, still groggy from sleep, he looked surprised but pleased. "Well, this is a treat," he said, sitting at the table and pulling her into a quick kiss on the cheek. "What's the occasion?" Sophia smiled, forcing warmth into her expression. "No occasion. I just thought we could use a quiet morning together." They ate in near silence, punctuated only by Ethan's occasional comments about work and the gym. Sophia listened intently, filing away his words like puzzle pieces. She noticed how he avoided direct eye contact when discussing his schedule, how his phone buzzed on the counter but he ignored it, a subtle but telling sign of avoidance. "Any plans for lunch?" she asked casually, setting her fork down. "Just a quick bite with a client," Ethan replied smoothly. "Nothing exciting." "Let me know if you're free later," Sophia said, keeping her tone light. "I'd love to spend some time together." Ethan nodded, his smile a practiced blend of charm and detachment, but Sophia saw the cracks forming beneath his composed exterior. Once Ethan left for the day, Sophia got to work. She called the private investigator she'd hired earlier and instructed him to follow Ethan, focusing on his lunch meeting. Her instincts told her this was another of his clandestine encounters with Lila. Sophia also reached out to Daniel, who had proven to be a valuable ally. Though her brother had been hesitant to get involved initially, he now seemed eager to help, perhaps sensing that justice, or retribution, was imminent. "I need you to monitor the Arcadia servers," Sophia said during their call. "Specifically, any emails or files being accessed by Ethan or Lila. If they're planning something, I want to know about it." Daniel hesitated. "Sure you want to do this? If this gets messy—" "It already is," Sophia interrupted. "I just need the proof to tie everything together." Daniel sighed but agreed, promising to update her by the end of the day. By early afternoon, the investigators sent Sophia a photo. Ethan and Lila were seated in a secluded corner of an upscale restaurant, their heads bent close together. The image alone would have been damning, but the investigator went further, capturing snippets of their conversation using a discreet recording device. Sophia listened to the audio in her office later, her hands trembling with a mix of fury and vindication. "We need to finalize everything before next week," Lila's voice said, low and urgent. "The transfer's almost complete, but she'll catch on if we're not careful." "Don't worry," Ethan replied. "Sophia's too distracted with her empire to notice. By the time she does, we'll be long gone." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she replayed the recording, committing their betrayal to memory. This wasn't just about stealing money, or even their affair. It was about the audacity of their belief that she was too blind, too trusting, to see through their lies. That evening, Sophia set the stage for the confrontation. She invited Ethan to dinner at their favorite rooftop restaurant, a place steeped in memories of anniversaries and milestones. The setting was perfect, a blend of elegance and familiarity designed to disarm him. Ethan arrived looking dapper as always, his suit tailored to perfection. He greeted her with a kiss, his charm in full effect. "You look stunning," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you," Sophia replied, her voice steady. "I thought we deserved a special night out." Over the course of the meal, Sophia played her role flawlessly. She laughed at Ethan's stories, complimented his wine selection, and even reminisced about their early years together. But as dessert arrived, she shifted gears. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss," she began, her tone light but deliberate. "I've been noticing some discrepancies at Arcadia, financial irregularities that don't quite add up." Ethan stiffened, but his smile didn't falter. "I'm sure it's nothing major. Lila's great at handling that sort of thing." "Interesting you mention Lila," Sophia said, leaning forward, "because her name does seem to come up a lot lately." For the first time, Ethan's mask slipped. His eyes darted away, just for a moment, but it was enough. "I don't know what you're implying," he said, his voice tight. "Oh, I think you do," Sophia said, her voice cold now. She slid her phone across the table, the screen displaying the damning photo of him and Lila at lunch. Ethan's face drained of color. "Sophia, I can explain." "Don't bother," she interrupted, cutting him off. "I've heard the recordings. I know about the offshore accounts, the stolen funds, and your pathetic plan to run away with her." The restaurant seemed to grow quieter, as though the world itself had stopped to listen. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He was caught, and he knew it. "You think I built this empire by being naive?" Sophia continued, her voice rising. "You think I wouldn't see through your lies? You've insulted me not just as your wife, but as a person. And for what? A petty affair? A get-rich-quick scheme?" Ethan looked as though he might argue, but the weight of Sophia's fury left him silent. She stood, throwing a stack of papers onto the table. "Those are divorce papers," she said. "I've already filed. You'll find the terms quite generous considering what you've done. But if you try to fight me, I'll destroy you. Professionally, personally, completely." With that, she walked out, leaving Ethan alone at the table, the weight of his actions crashing down around him. The next day, Sophia held an emergency board meeting at Arcadia. She presented the evidence against Lila, laying out her betrayal in excruciating detail. The board voted unanimously to terminate Lila and refer the matter to legal authorities. Lila's downfall was swift and brutal. Within hours, her accounts were frozen, her reputation shattered. Ethan, meanwhile, tried to salvage his own position. But Sophia's legal team had already dismantled his assets and cut off his access to Arcadia's finances. As Sophia stood in her office that evening, watching the city lights flicker, she felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Her life had been upended, but she had survived. More than that, she had prevailed. Still, a lingering unease remained. Betrayal had come from the people closest to her, and while she had exacted her revenge, trust would forever be a fragile thing. She vowed to rebuild her life, stronger and more resilient than ever, but she knew she would never look at those around her the same way again. Sophia returned home late that evening, her heels clicking against the marble floors of the penthouse. The silence was oppressive, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few days. The air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Her mind was a swirl of triumph, exhaustion, and a lingering emptiness she couldn't shake. Ethan was gone. Lila was disgraced. Arcadia was secure. Yet something inside her felt unresolved, as if she had crossed a battlefield, only to find that the war wasn't truly over. She poured herself a glass of wine and sank into the plush leather armchair in the corner of the living room. The city lights twinkled beyond the massive windows, a reminder of the world that continued moving, indifferent to her personal turmoil. Sophia had always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to adapt and overcome. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The image of Ethan's face when she had confronted him at dinner replayed in her mind. The disbelief, the shame, and the faint glimmer of defiance. She had crushed that defiance, she thought. Or had she? Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. She hesitated before picking it up. The name on the screen was Daniel's, and for a brief moment she considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won out. She answered, her voice calm and measured. "What is it, Daniel?" "I've been going through the server logs like you asked," he said, his tone cautious. "There's something you need to see." Sophia straightened in her chair, her grip tightening on the phone. "What did you find?" "There's a set of files that Lila accessed frequently over the past 6 months," Daniel continued. "At first, they looked like routine project documents, but when I dug deeper, I found encrypted messages embedded in them. They weren't just about siphoning money. There's more." Sophia's heart began to race, though she kept her voice steady. "What kind of more, Daniel?" It's hard to say exactly, but there's a pattern. Leela wasn't just embezzling funds. She was communicating with someone outside the company, feeding them information. Confidential information. Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. Who was she talking to? "I'm still working on decrypting everything, but the little I've pieced together suggests she was in contact with a competitor. I don't think this was just about money, Sophia. This was sabotage." The word hit her like a physical blow. Sabotage. Her betrayal wasn't just personal. It was professional, systemic, and calculated. This wasn't the work of two lovers trying to escape with stolen money. It was part of a larger plan to undermine everything she had built. "Keep working on it," she said, her voice sharper now. "I want names, dates, everything." "Will do," Daniel replied. "But Sophia, be careful. This goes deeper than we thought." She hung up and stared at the glass of wine in her hand, her appetite for it gone. Sabotage. The word echoed in her mind, bringing with it a wave of anger that was colder and more precise than anything she had felt before. If Ethan and Lila had been working with an outside party, it meant there was still an enemy lurking in the shadows. Someone who had leveraged their weaknesses, exploited their greed, and turned them into pawns in a larger game. Sophia stood and paced the room, her mind racing through the possibilities. Who could it be? A rival company? A disgruntled former employee? Arcadia had its share of enemies. Competitors who resented her dominance in the renewable energy market, activists who believed her innovations weren't radical enough, and even board members who had been quietly ousted when they failed to meet her standards. Any one of them could have orchestrated this. Her thoughts were interrupted by another buzz from her phone. This time it was a message from her private investigator. She opened it quickly, her eyes scanning the text. Ethan has been in contact with a man named Victor Crane, known for corporate espionage, likely the link between him, Lila, and whoever's behind this, sending dossier. A second later, a document appeared on her screen. Victor Crane's face stared back at her. A sharp, angular man with piercing eyes and a reputation as one of the most dangerous operatives in the business world. He had been implicated in several high-profile scandals, though nothing had ever been proven. If he was involved, this wasn't just a simple betrayal. This was a calculated attack designed to cripple her and her company. Sophia sat down, her mind racing as she absorbed the information. Victor Crane. The name alone sent a surge of adrenaline through her veins. She had heard of him, of course. Everyone in her industry had. He was a ghost, a shadow, a whisper in the corridors of power. If he had set his sights on Arcadia, it meant she was a threat, an obstacle to be removed. But why? Why now? Why her? She opened her laptop and began researching everything she could find about Crane. His connections, his past targets, his methods. The more she read, the more her anger deepened. This wasn't just about money or information. It was about power, control, and the destruction of everything she had worked for. The night wore on as she pieced together the fragments of the conspiracy. Ethan and Lila had been pawns, yes, but they had also been willing participants. They had given Crane the foothold he needed to infiltrate her company. But they were expendable. The real threat was still out there, and Sophia knew she couldn't afford to wait for him to make the next move. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes burning from hours of staring at the screen. The city outside her window was still alive, its lights flickering like distant stars. But the world inside her penthouse was quiet, heavy with the weight of what she had uncovered. She thought about the people she had trusted, the empire she had built, and the enemies who had been watching her, waiting for a chance to strike. Sophia took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. She had come too far, sacrificed too much to let anyone take it away from her. If Victor Crane thought he could bring her down, he had underestimated her. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter. a strategist, a woman who had built her life from the ground up and would burn it all down before letting someone else take it from her. She closed her laptop and stood, her mind already forming a plan. It would take time, resources, and a level of cunning that even Crane wouldn't expect. But she would find him, she would expose him, and when the dust settled, he would regret ever crossing her. For the first time that night, Sophia felt a flicker of satisfaction. She wasn't defeated, she was just getting started. Sophia moved through the next few days like a predator stalking prey, each action calculated, each move deliberate. The name Victor Crane loomed large in her thoughts, an omnipresent specter tied to the unraveling of her life. She enlisted Daniel to sift through the encrypted files, directing his attention to any communication linked to Crane. Meanwhile, her private investigator provided a steady stream of updates, each one a puzzle piece in the intricate web surrounding Arcadia's sabotage. She operated with relentless focus, drawing no distinction between personal and professional as she worked to dismantle the plot against her. Late one evening, a breakthrough arrived in the form of an email. Daniel had decrypted the final set of files, revealing a direct correspondence between Leela and Crane. The emails detailed their collusion, outlining how Leela had siphoned confidential data from Arcadia's server, providing Crane with access to proprietary technologies worth billions. The messages dripped with arrogance, a belief that Sophia's trust in Leela would blind her to the betrayal. But what chilled Sophia most was the final thread. A proposed meeting between Crane and Ethan, set to take place at a private club on the outskirts of the city. Sophia knew this was her moment. She had the evidence to expose them, but exposing wasn't enough. She needed to face Crane directly to ensure he understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. She called her investigator, instructing him to secure a way into the club. No detail was left to chance. By the time the night of the meeting arrived, Sophia was prepared for a confrontation that would either cement her meeting or bring her down in flames. The club exuded exclusivity, its grand facade glowing under soft amber lights. Sophia arrived alone, her presence commanding attention even among the city's elite. She was dressed to perfection, her tailored suit exuding power, while her composed demeanor masked the storm inside her. She walked through the lavish lobby with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors as though announcing her arrival. The staff offered polite smiles but didn't question her presence. Her reputation was enough to grant her access to spaces others could only dream of entering. In the private lounge, Crane sat at a corner table, his back to the room. Ethan was beside him, gesturing animatedly, clearly trying to sell whatever scheme they had concocted. Crane listened with a detached expression, his cold gaze betraying neither approval nor disdain. Sophia watched them for a moment, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from anticipation. She stepped forward, her heels deliberately loud against the hardwood floor. Both men turned as she approached, their faces registering varying degrees of surprise. "Gentlemen," she said smoothly, taking the empty seat at their table without waiting for an invitation, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Ethan's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form words. Crane, on the other hand, remained composed, though his sharp eyes narrowed as he assessed her. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. "Sophia Delgado?" Crane said finally, his voice as smooth as silk. "I wasn't expecting the pleasure of your company." "I'm sure you weren't," Sophia replied, her tone icy. "But I couldn't resist the opportunity to meet the man orchestrating the attempted downfall of Arcadia Tech." Crane's lips curled into a faint smile, his confidence unshaken. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Sophia said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were the decrypted emails, the financial records, and the photographs tying Crane, Ethan, and Lila to the scheme. Crane opened it casually, scanning the contents with mild interest, while Ethan fidgeted nervously beside him. "This is quite a collection," Crane said, closing the folder and setting it aside. But business is a game of strategy, Ms. Delgado. Surely you can appreciate that. Strategy? Ugh. Sophia's voice sharpened, her anger finally seeping through. Stealing intellectual property and bribing my employees isn't strategy, it's cowardice. You've made a career out of exploiting weaknesses, but you underestimate me. That's your fatal mistake. Crane's smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He leaned forward slightly, his tone growing colder. Be careful, Miss Delgado. Accusations like these can have consequences. Sophia didn't flinch. She leaned in as well, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Consequences? Let me tell you about consequences. I've already filed lawsuits against your shell companies. Arcadia's board is prepared to launch a full-scale investigation, and every journalist in the city will have your name by morning. Your reputation, your assets, your entire operation, it's over. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but Crane remained still, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Finally, Crane leaned back, his hands steepled under his chin. You're impressive, he admitted. I'll give you that. But you're not the only one who knows how to play this game. We'll see about that, Sophia said, standing abruptly. She turned to Ethan, her gaze colder than ice. And you disgust me. You betrayed not only our marriage, but everything we built together. When this is over, you'll have nothing. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Sophia didn't wait for a response. She walked away, her every step radiating the confidence of a woman who had taken back control. As she exited the club, the cool night air hit her face, filling her lungs with a sense of liberation. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Sofia Delgado had faced her enemies, and she was ready to finish what they had started.